to this session on what makes good nature-based solutions. Great to see everybody here. Great to see we've managed to fill the audience as far back as the coffee shop. Very excited to have this session. Very excited to see these 5 panelists with their global expertise and knowledge of nature-based solutions. We're going to have a very exciting 55 minutes here. Just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, what are nature-based solutions? From my mind, they're interventions that maintain or enhance ecosystems or landscapes or other units of biodiversity and enable them to be parts of solutions for global challenges. The number one global challenge, of course, is climate change. That's why we're all here. But other challenges are also very important. Hunger, poverty, clean water, solutions to biodiversity conservation. We need all of those, and we especially need them to be taking place alongside the solutions to climate change. Nature-based solutions have been around for about 20 years, but in the last 4 or 5 years have become much more prevalent in science, in government, in development, in a range of spheres. And at Kew we have projects that are themselves nature-based solutions or components of nature-based solutions in countries like Mexico, Peru, Colombia, Madagascar, St. Helena, and of course in the UK. And we're looking at sequestration of carbon, we're looking at well-being components of that site. But today I want to keep this a little bit short. I want to hear about what the panel have got to say about what they think makes good nature-based solutions based on their knowledge and experience of the field. And then I hope we'll have time, at least 20 minutes at the end, for questions from you guys, to get a real discussion going and to try and generate a consensus around what we all think make good nature-based solutions. So with that, I will go to the first speaker. That is Professor Nathalie Seddon, who's the Director of the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative at the University of Oxford in the UK. Nathalie.
Okay, I'll use this one. Great. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm really excited to be here talking about nature-based solutions on the Adaptation and Loss and Damage Day, because I think in recent months, recent years, everyone associates nature-based solutions with climate change mitigation, but nature plays an incredibly important, and has done for a long time, incredibly important role in protecting people from the impacts of climate change and helping them to adapt. More about which in a second. So yeah, it's good to be here. We'll be talking about 4 guidelines for successful sustainable nature-based solutions, and today at this event we'll be launching our new global interactive map of best practice nature-based solutions from around the world, which I hope you will enjoy interacting with later. So the idea of a nature-based solution arises from deep understanding, both from practice and from science, that healthy, flourishing ecosystems support human communities in multitudes of ways. We know that they play an important role in drawing down and storing carbon, in supporting adaptation and food security, in supporting mental health and well-being in general. And I think the idea, culture, which is the second biggest source of greenhouse gases. So in theory, enhancing our carbon stores for protecting and restoring our ecosystems can also protect biodiversity while supporting all sorts of other sustainable development goals along the way. So there are sort of 5 broad buckets of a nature-based solution: is protecting, restoring and connecting a diversity of ecosystems, both on land and the sea. It also involves regenerating our working lands and our seas, so our croplands and our timberlands. And that is actually an area of nature-based solutions that sometimes gets overlooked, yet is at least 40% of the global mitigation potential comes from regenerating our working lands, 40% from protecting our ecosystems. And then the final big category of a nature-based solution is bringing nature into our urban areas, green infrastructure and blue infrastructure. Now, there's a growing body of evidence, as I've said, that working with nature can reduce vulnerability to climate change all over the world, and also protect biodiversity. At the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative at the University of Oxford, we've been bringing this information together in a living data set that grows all the time, with evidence from peer-reviewed literature and also the grey literature. And at COP, we've launched these 3 policy briefs highlighting recent research on the benefits for adaptation and biodiversity of investing in nature. We've also launched some films about nature-based solutions in action around the UK. which is in some ways why we're having this event today. There are concerns that nature-based solutions are being used in greenwashing, with high-emitting entities investing in nature-based solutions in such a way as to distract from the need to rapidly phase out the use of fossil fuels. There have also been a lot of concerns, well-publicised concerns now, that there's been an over-emphasis on tree planting for carbon storage rather than investing in a wide diversity of ecosystems for the multiple of benefits that they bring. There are concerns that this over-emphasis on tree planting might compromise the permanence because of this emphasis on single species, often exotic species tree plantations, which tend to be very risky, short-term carbon stores. They have low resilience to things like fire and disease. There can be adverse impacts on biodiversity if those plantations replace carbon-rich biodiverse ecosystems, as they sometimes do, or distract from the need to protect our intact ecosystems. And there can also be very adverse impacts on local communities. Some biological forms of carbon sequestration, such as BECCS and afforestation, can, in areas where regulatory frameworks are weak, involve land grabs and violation of human rights. So nature-based solutions have shot up international policy and business agendas, and it's very, very important, therefore, to get the message right on what constitutes a successful and sustainable nature-based solutions. So a large group of research, conservation and development organisations agreed on a set of 4 overarching principles about what good nature-based solutions look like, which I'm going to very, very quickly go through here because
nature-based solutions need to be monitored. We need to know how are they progressing, and what are finally the solutions that they bring. And the solutions that people are waiting are economic and social solutions, and of course environmental, the 3 elements I mentioned before. And the other challenge has to do with regulation, and regulation that maybe is not explicitly for nature-based solutions, but are complementary. For instance, this idea of the greenwashing that Nathalie presented, if we don't make the case for any actor, let's say, I don't know, maybe the private sector or other kinds of organizations, that they have to reduce their emissions before they compensate or before they neutralize, and there is where we have this option or problem of greenwashing. So we need also regulations given by the governments in order to signalize very clearly that these kinds of interventions should not be used like that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosa. Some stimulating components there. I hope that will bring up some good questions later. Next intervention is from Dr. Sarah Biddy, Rakotonarivo, who is the leader of the Project for Climate and People in Madagascar and has a position at the University of Antananarivo. Dr. Sarah Biddy.
Thank you, Paul, and hi, everyone. So I'm Sarobidy Rakotonarivo. I'm an environmental economist from the University of Antananarivo in Madagascar. And I've spent much of the last decade researching the impacts of nature-based solutions, such as forest conservation, on communities in Gabon, Tanzania, Kenya, and in my home country, Madagascar. I spent hours interviewing local people living on the forest edge. And while I cannot claim that I live the lives of these people who are most affected by forest conservation, we share a language, a culture, and a lot of understanding. We all agree that nature-based solutions are really important if we're going to tackle climate change. And you all say that we need to involve local communities in these initiatives. But all of us have been so disappointed so far with the progress. Despite well-meaning efforts, forest loss continues, and local communities are struggling. While nature-based solutions may be a new language, the underlying rationale is not new. So why is forest loss persisting despite 3 decades of efforts? So my research suggests that we often prefer simplistic win-win narratives that forest is good for people on the planet. We refuse to fully acknowledge that there might be people who lose out from the restrictions imposed by forest conservation, that there genuinely are winners and losers from these nature-based solutions initiatives. The leaders at Glasgow announced they would end deforestation by 2030, but do we really know how to achieve it and do it equitably without making forest communities poorer? I'm not sure we know the real cost of ending deforestation or restoring degraded lands equitably. Don't get me wrong, I'm delighted to see the renewed commitment on stopping deforestation. But as my friend Tutiak, who is a leader of Indigenous Peoples Network from Ecuador, put it, if the money is being spent on bureaucracy or on paying consultants or international organizations, then we shouldn't expect much. So what should we do then? First, implementation will depend on wherever local communities have secure and clear land, rights to their lands and to the forests. Currently, the implementers of these nature-based solution initiatives are governments who are the de jure or the legal owners of most of the forests. And this amasnot is inherited from colonial regimes. In much of Africa, local people's traditional claims to their lands and to their forests are not recognized by the government. And this means that there is a risk that the benefits of nature-based solutions, such as carbon revenue, may not reach local communities. Second, recognizing local rights isn't enough. We need to make it worthwhile for these local people to maintain these forests. And this implies adequate and long-term funding for local livelihoods. Transitioning to more sustainable farming techniques will play a key role, but it's not easy. It needs genuine investment, and we cannot do it on the cheap. We need to pay the real costs. The history of conservation is littered by mismatches between the stated goal and the funding allocated to it, and the end result is usually failure, with often local communities bearing the cost. Warm words about indigenous peoples and local communities won't change this fundamental injustice. In the UK, governments and conservationists are very comfortable with paying rich country landowners, such as large Scottish estates, to lock up carbon. And it feels sometimes that if you are relatively rich, then your costs get paid. But if you are one of the poorest in the world, then you just get displaced without compensations. So we need to recognize that it is those people at the forest frontier holding an axe that will have the biggest influence over what happens. And we can have endless discussions at places like this in Glasgow, but unless these people making decisions about how they farm are properly empowered and their local rights are recognized, I'm not sure a solution based on nature is actually possible. So to wrap up, I'd like to urge you to watch a film we produced, Voices from the Forest. It does a much better job in communicating these issues in a much more human and personal level. Thank you, Ms. Socha.
Ms. Odrobecka. Thank you very much, Dr. Sarobidy. Some really powerful messages in there that we know what we all need to come back to and reflect on in a minute. But let's move on. Dr. Tasfia Tasnim will speak next, the Programme Coordinator for Nature-Based Solutions at the International Centre for Climate Change and Development in Bangladesh. Tasfia.
Yes, thank you so much, Paul, and hello everyone. I'm Tasfia. I coordinate the program Nature-Based Solutions at the International Centre for Climate Change and Development. So far we have set up the stage that nature-based solutions have great potential for locally led climate action. So rather to focus on what makes good nature-based solutions, I'd like to focus on what to do to make happen good nature-based solutions, and I would like to focus on talk about 3 important points, which I think you all can also connect. I'll talk about from Bangladesh perspective, and I hope that you'll get to connect from your country perspective as well. So I think the first point that I would like to highlight is the evidence and communicating on evidence. It's very important to, and what we are doing in Bangladesh is that we are gathering all the best practices and case studies in one of the portal that Nature-Based Solutions Initiative and ICCCAD has been developed. We are calling this portal as Nature-Based Solutions Bangladesh portal, which you can go through by logging into nbsbangladesh.info, where you can find that how we are gathering cases on different best practices, NBS practices done by different organizations. So when I said different organizations, we are actually trying to build a network. We are calling this NBS Bangladesh network, so that we all can communicate on a same message, and because as I think all of the speakers that have mentioned that people are using this buzzword like nature-based solutions to implement different various projects, and it's very important that we communicate these term better within the researchers, practitioners, and policymakers. So I think it's very important that this community work together, not as silos, and it's very important to take the research into the practice and policy. And through that, what we have done is that I think Professor Nathalie has shared that as well, that is the very first Bangladesh has done one paper on gathering the effectiveness, gathering the evidence on the effectiveness of nature-based solutions for addressing the climate change and sustainable development goals, which will soon be published in Frontiers Journal. So I hope you all can see that. The second point that I would like to mention is on the data, lack of data, which sometimes hinder for practitioners or policymakers to uptick on the nature-based solutions. For example, when we, like in Bangladesh, we have been practicing on these ecosystem-based approaches or nature-based approaches for past 50 to 60 years. But when we NBS and ICCCAD investigated into these solutions, what we have found out is that there is, we always report that these mangrove afforestation or sustainable fisheries resource management, these have enriched the biodiversity or the species richness has been made. But sometimes there is lack of reporting with the data. And we often ask that, okay, is that because when there is nature-based solutions, there has to be human benefit as well as biodiversity benefit, and this is very important. We sometimes miss this biodiversity benefit part, and we want to use the nature, utilize the nature to happen the human well-being. But the biodiversity component sometimes got missing. So this is something what we have found in our study as well. And finally, what I like to highlight is the integration of NBS or mainstreaming of NBS in the policy level. So sometimes there are cultural biases that policymakers do not want to invest in NBS because they do not understand, or they sometimes often ignore to understand that how investing in nature can give benefits. So it is very important that we communicate this message, that to show them that, okay, if you invest in nature, you will gain this benefit, because policymakers do want to calculate everything with the economy, because economy is very important as well. So we want to establish that if you invest in NBS, your economy will be better. It won't be less. It will be in the longer term probably, but there's some short-term benefits as well. Like with NBSI, ICCCAD, and Peru as well, that we are gathering data on how NBS is contributing to the livelihood of the people, how it is contributing to the livelihood diversification people, and how the social and equity dimension matters. So I'd like to conclude my speech here, and thanks to everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tasfia, final intervention is from Dr. Andrea Ledward, who's the International Biodiversity and Climate Director at the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in the UK Government. Andrea.
Thank you very much, and what a privilege to be on such a highly qualified and insightful panel, so thank you for the invitation. I guess I am the kind of policymaker that's been referred to, and also the more political end, given the UK presidency. So what I'll do is just give you a sense of how the UK government at the moment is thinking about nature and nature-based solutions, and then there are a few slides with a few examples of nature-based solutions and projects that we're supporting both in the UK and in Madagascar, if that's helpful. So just to say that for the COP presidency, we have very much decided to put nature-based solutions and nature at the heart of the COP so far. Many of you, I'm sure, were here on Nature and Land Use Day on Saturday, as well as last Tuesday for the World Leaders Summit with the event on forests and land use. My role is supporting Lord Goldsmith, who is the SRO on nature across the whole of COP. And what we've tried to do is really have two objectives. One, to focus on how we can protect and restore ecosystems. And the second thing is about how we can support a more just transition to more sustainable agriculture with a view to really addressing some of the main drivers around deforestation. So those were our headline objectives. And I think what's been very clear in all the discussions around nature in particular is the kind of three main points that I've been hearing everybody on the panel discuss. The first thing is nature is very much at the heart of Indigenous people's kind of management of their natural land and management of their communities and the management of their resources. And so the more that we listen to Indigenous people and the more that we work closely in partnership with Indigenous people, the more we are naturally going to be having nature at the heart of the solution and a less technological solution. The second is that nature and natural capital are very important economic assets. So I don't know if any of you heard the discussion on Saturday afternoon between Nick Stern and Partha Dasgupta in the UK Pavilion, but they were talking about the Dasgupta review on the economics of biodiversity, very much talking about how we can really value nature as an asset and talking very powerfully about the importance of putting nature and biodiversity at the heart of our political and economic decision making going forward. Not as a nice to have, but an absolute essential, given that it's a finite resource that we have to be more respectful of and value. And then finally, I think what's also been very clear is that land use choices are deeply political. Some of you may be experiencing and be part of that journey in the UK as part of our transition away from the Common Agricultural Policy as we're shifting to a new environmental land management scheme and thinking about how we pay farmers for public goods, which means really thinking about the kind of the natural assets and thinking about the natural capital that exists on farms, as well as then when we go to our aid programme and we think about how we get solutions that are good for nature, for climate and people, really making commitments at the moment about doing no harm and thinking what it means to be nature positive in the longer term and how we think in those terms. So some of you may have seen there have been a number of announcements this week. We've got all the MDBs signing a joint statement on nature, which was very clearly about how they become nature positive, with significant investments across all those MDBs around how you create new tools, how you create new reporting mechanisms, what it means to value and think about nature right at the heart of their planning on climate and people. And you'll also have heard a number of kind of significant financial commitments over the last week in the terms of billions. And now the question for us really is, how do you make that happen? What does that actually mean in practice on the ground? And I guess that was why there were a couple of slides in a minute on two projects. One was in particular looking at an example in Medmerry, which is at the time was one of the largest open coast projects in Europe. And you can see the facts and figures there. I'm not going to kind of read them all out, but it was basically constructing 4 miles of new sea defences to protect properties from flood, but also creating new wetland for wildlife at the same time, which has managed to create these multiple benefits for people managing down risk, but also creating this really intertidal habitat and space where people can have more access and recreation. And then the next slide was on the Blue Forests programme, where the UK and DEFRA have been supporting the Blue Forest programme there through Blue Ventures, very much working closely with local communities to improve livelihoods and think about sustainable mangrove forestry and fisheries management. We think the work of the programme is predicted to be worth about 70 million over 20 years and is going to be benefiting about 86,000 people, as you can see there, and will really be operating in 3 sites in Madagascar and then 2 sites in Indonesia going forward. But I think this is really for us a programme that we want to be thinking about how we replicate. The government just announced yesterday another 40 million for a new global centre on biodiversity and climate, where we're going to be thinking about how we really extend knowledge about bringing together our learning on biodiversity and climate globally, and really create new centres of excellence in thinking about knowledge transfer and thinking about working with networks of partners in developing countries to make sure that the knowledge and the capability really is strengthened in developing countries.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andrea. I think that drew out some really great examples, but also linked this session into the whole of the rest of the conference, which I think is great. I can't believe after those 5 brilliant interventions there aren't some questions. So who wants to ask the first question? Okay, that gentleman there can have the first question. And then you're next, I think.
Thank you. Ian Dunn from Plant Life. Could I come back right to the beginning, Nathalie, where you talked about multiple ecosystems being really important for NBS, and yet 90% of what we hear about is trees. How do we start to shift the political commentary from primarily talking about trees because they're easy to count to a far more nuanced mosaic about ecosystems?
So what I seem to be finding is that people are using trees as a shorthand for nature, partly because everybody knows what a tree is. People love trees. They can hug them. They can plant them. There's something tractable and measurable about them. But actually, I think certainly in the UK, the Wildlife Trust and other organisations, DEFRA and so forth, have been massively promoting, for example, the importance of peatlands. And actually, it was on Wildlife's TV thing last night. We did a poll, and there were several hundred people. And the question to the audience was, what are the most important ecosystems in the UK for climate change? And 65% of them answered peatlands. So I think, well, I mean, it's a Wildlife Trust audience, so it's obviously a narrow audience. And what you're speaking about is to the general public more broadly. But I think certainly all over the world, I mean, there's, and in the UK you highlighted Medbury, and actually Medbury is in one of our films. So we've done these films on nature-based solutions in action around the UK, and they encompass a wide diversity. So I think we can work in different media. So I'm a scientist, and for a very long time I generally just published in papers, but I've since over the last couple of years been using animations and film and other things. And one of the key core aspects of that is to try and communicate the fact that we mean all ecosystems. And the other point related to that is also it's very important to connect. I was trying to emphasize connecting ecosystems is important, because in a rapidly changing world, nature needs to be connected because species and genes move. And also, when we think about restoring and regenerating, we also have to accept the fact that the world is changing, and actually native species might not be the appropriate ones to plant in certain cases. So we actually need quite an experimental approach, and that's why we need to constantly engage with the science, because it might be that a forest grows well here now, but it might not in 50 years' time, or if it does, it might be different tree species. So we have to sort of open our minds when we think about nature-based solutions to different ecosystems and possibly different species assemblages as well. Thanks.
Any other views on trees in nature-based solutions that anyone wants to offer? I'm not seeing any other interest. Oh, Andrea, go for it.
I don't mind. I mean, in terms of from a COP perspective, I think, yes, you're right. Very early in the World Leaders Summit had a very big event on forests and land use, which certainly captured the headlines with 132 countries now signing up to a new global declaration. But I think there has been, as we've gone through the last week, certainly on Ocean Day, there was a very big focus there on mangroves, salt marshes, and how we really think about the coastal habitats in particular. And I think on Nature and Land Use Day, it was very much about how do we shift into a broader range of ecosystems, how do we think about the wetlands, how do we really think about restoring and protecting. And the 30 by 30 lens, I think, is one. There was a lot of conversations around that, about both ocean on land as being a very helpful way of getting to a spatial level around protection and restoration. So it certainly grabbed the headlines at the beginning of the week through a forest lens. But that's also because of the power of forests in terms of getting to 1.5 degrees. And that is the overall kind of, at this point, the very big message on this overall COP from a presidency perspective is we've got to keep 1.5 degrees within reach. I mean, that's the kind of bottom line, and we have to do the core work on forests if we're going to get to 1.5 degrees. And that's, blue forests as well as the forests on land.
I'm going to take that gentleman there and then come down to the front, because he was in first, and then you're next.
Hello, my name's Elliot. I'm from Citizen Zoo, which is a rewilding organisation that puts communities at the heart of all of our projects. My question to you is, 56% of the world's population live in urban environments, 86% of the UK's population live in an urban environment. What role do you see the urban environment playing in nature-based solutions to sort of help reconnect people to nature, but also make these environments resilient to climate change in the future?
Nat again. Go first,
I was
Sarobidy.
struggling to hear you, so if Paul can probably like...
Urban environments and urban NBS, I think was the gist.
Okay, I won't speak for long. Massively important, and there's been an awful lot of work, loads of work, especially in Europe, but it's also spreading a bit more now on the effectiveness of working with nature. As you say, 80% of the world's global population are going to be living in cities, and there's loads of evidence now that, really good evidence and growing all the time on the importance of green spaces for reducing the impacts of heat waves and reducing the impacts of flooding, but also on the benefits for mental health and well-being. So these are sort of robust data sets now. So urban engineers and urban planners now are factoring nature-based solutions much more explicitly into in some parts of the world. Still more work to be done, and there's still far too much concrete around. But certainly, for example, in the UK, the more of these flash floods we're getting, the more it's becoming abundantly clear that all this concrete is a very bad idea, that we need more porous and connected surfaces. And so sort of it's becoming increasingly self-evident that we absolutely have to have more nature in cities. And also, it's about reconnecting people. If most of the people are in cities, we need the nature to be there, because it's only through that reconnection with nature will we get the systemic change that we need to scale all this up.
And if you want to look ahead to cities, regions and the Built Environment Day, which is on Thursday this week, there are going to be a number of sessions. There's going to be one at 11 o'clock organised by the Presidency, looking specifically at nature and cities, with C40 and Cities for Forests. And there's a very interesting set of domestic work going on as well in the UK, particularly on biodiversity net gain, which is currently going through Parliament as part of the Environment Bill, where we're essentially legislating that every time new housing or major infrastructure is built in the UK, there has to be a 10% gain in habitat in the development of that project, which is incredibly big shift actually in terms of the overall regulatory environment, which will help us to naturally start kind of increasing the amount of nature in all the urban environments in the UK.
Fantastic.
And I'm really
Thank
sorry,
you.
but I'm going to have to run. I'm very sorry.
Thank you for your contribution. It was wonderful. Thank you. Taspia.
Can I add to, I hope it's okay. Hello? Yeah, I think it's working. So I would like to echo with you is that though Nathalie and Andrea mentioned that there are growing potentials and people are investing in urban infrastructures. When the paper that I mentioned on the Bangladesh, we have gone through 89 resources after a lot of systematic review, after thousands of paper. But we did not find one single intervention on urban NBS in Bangladesh. So for countries like developing countries or lower middle income countries, there is a gap in investing in, when we talk, nature-based solutions is more rural. There is a perspective like that. And also, when I think I have seen that the rural or the indigenous people, they value nature more than urban people, because they live with that. And the urban, we mean that there is concrete or jungle, concrete jungle, we say like that. So yes, it's very important that to invest in urban infrastructures to solve problems. And there is one project that we actually talk about. It's not a NBS, urban NBS project. It's a civil engineering project, but that has done with the capital of Dhaka. They have used the water bodies and green infrastructures to create a communication pathway. And that is the area, I think, where if anyone from Bangladesh or other people here or people who have visited, that is the place where there is less traffic congestion than the other part of the country. So I think we can use NBS to solve linking urban green infrastructure to solve all these development challenges that I would like to say. So yeah, very, very good point. That's why I said that we need to rather than with guidelines, we need to the policymakers need to prioritize on where to invest on from their own country perspective to make the most out of nature and in the through the development as well. Yeah.
Thank you. I've got further questions here, here, and here, I think. So 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you. So my question is much related to finance. As from the recent publication from WRI, still 1.4% of funding are going to nature-based solution for adaptation. So that's the question: what we need to do more, and what we still need to unlock to make sure that nature-based solutions that deliver adaptation benefits have more attention, because I think that we are still struggling for that. So I would like to have more insight from you, what is needed to make sure that it's really, we have some proof that it's workable. Thank you.
Who'd like to make a start with that? Rosa, perhaps?
Yeah. Well, I think it has to do with something I try to communicate, which is evidence. We need the evidence that nature-based solutions are going to bring benefits to the population. They are going to help reduce poverty. They are, going to help strengthen or increase the means of living of the populations. I am thinking of the conversation of that the Ministry of Environment, where I work right now, can have to the Ministry of Economy, for if we are speaking of public resources. So there has to be some decision making in terms of what are the economic benefits of these solutions.
I guess I can just add that, as I said, more climate-friendly agricultural techniques will be really essential, and this is, I believe, a key adaptation activity. But the problem is, like from my perspective and also from my research, is that we've often underestimated the cost of making this happen. So usually, what happens on the ground is development projects or agricultural projects, and extension officers come into a rural village and then telling people that they've got to switch to this new agricultural technique. They stay for 1 week or 2 weeks, like teaching them the new method, and that's it. And I think it's just so unreasonable to expect that the transition is going to happen with these kind of practices. So something that really like to get across is that also like we need to learn from the failure. We need to learn our lessons. In the airline industry, even with the most minor mistakes in safety procedures, they investigate very closely at what went wrong. And I feel that in conservation, we don't look closely at our failures, or we don't look at all. And I think there is a big problem there. I'd like to see more recognition of past failures, more recognition of the trade-offs that are inherent in this kind of nature-based solutions. If people are going to adopt a new technique, these are very expensive, these are more time-consuming and less efficient than the agricultural techniques they've been doing. So this needs time, this needs a lot more investment. Thank you.
Tasfia, you had a point as well, I think.
Yes. I think that to mobilize or to channel finance on nature-based solutions, it is first very important that nature-based solutions is highlighted in the policy, because if the policy does not account or include nature-based solutions, then governments or the business partners or organization, they do not feel like investing in there. So this is one point, one important point, and our research shows that out of 400 projects that Bangladesh Climate Change Trust Fund, that is a fund that is significant for dealing with addressing the climate change impacts in Bangladesh, out of 400 projects, only 38 projects have implemented in the solutions that have elements of nature in it. So we actually tried to investigate and communicated this with the Ministry of Planning in Bangladesh, that okay, why this is so, and they say that we do not understand that we need some numbers and figures. So they actually, the policymakers, they don't have time to read on like our research papers and all. They want very numbers that if you invest here, you will get here, like you will return, it will return like these benefits. So this I think I have already mentioned, but I would like to reiterate again that NBSI, ICCCAD and Peru, we have like doing a project where we want to find, like, not too many, like 10 cases from each countries to highlight that how investing in nature has benefited or have like benefited people and economy, and how nature-based solutions can have the potential for longer, like short-term and longer-term economic recovery. So that is very important to channelize finance in more nature-based solutions. Yeah.
Just very quick mention on private finance. So big change that's happening is that companies are recognizing that the continued destruction of nature is undermining their, well, it's providing a lot, increasing their risks, their regulatory risks, increasingly their reputational risks, but in particular their supply chain continuity and resilience risk. And so there's a lot of investment coming to invest in nature-based solutions within supply chains. It's a process called nature-based insetting. And so it's like a lot of finance for adaptation will possibly come for different reasons. It might come mainly from carbon finance, but if you invest in nature in the right way within supply chains, you get the adaptation benefits as well. So it's about a joined-up approach, not just thinking about adaptation, not just thinking about mitigation. I think a lot of the funding will come from the private sector through this process. A lot of regulation on ESG is coming. Government companies are going to have to report on their impacts on biodiversity, on carbon, and on social equity, and they're going to have to reduce those impacts and then offset them or inset them within their supply chains. And I think that's where the billions and the trillions are going to come for nature for adaptation.
Key point, I think. Let's move on to the question that was here. Do you want to pick up the microphone?
Hello. So much of us as human beings seem to want to have sort of short-term impacts. You know, we want to see trees planted, we want to see things done. But nature has a really wonderful way of doing things themselves. And I'm just wondering if there's a way that we can get evidence and we can get some of the science and some of the incentives behind natural regeneration, natural recolonisation and rewilding, and whether any of that is happening anywhere in the world.
So it's a huge thing, and in fact, nature sometimes can take a long time to deliver all the benefits. It can't do everything at once immediately. And some of many of the examples, for example, on the global platform, are projects that have been established a long time. They were done in a culturally appropriate way. That in itself takes a long time. As you say, it takes a long time for new practices to be developed and to share practices. And so there are often the best practice examples that we want to share with the world are ones that have been done slowly and gradually. And we need to sort of, be patient. And there needs to be ways of compensating communities for those initial years while it takes time. Because it takes time to rewild your farm. And unless you're extraordinarily rich, you have to, that there needs to be compensation mechanisms. So I know in projects in Bangladesh around the fisheries, freshwater fisheries, there's compensation payment with rice and so on during the periods of time where the rivers are left to regenerate their natural fish stocks. And so that's really important. And accepting that, it can take time and there will need to be compensation for local communities while those benefits. But the cost of inaction is far lower. Cost of inaction is far lower than the cost of action. No, the cost of action. Oh my goodness, I've done too many talks. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Those economic benefits will be there in the long term. Things might be expensive in the short term, but we get there in the end. Sorry.
Any other perspectives? Sarah Biddy.
Just a very quick comment. I think that in addition to the compensations, the monetary compensation money, there is a lot more. And this is where I'd like to come back to the issue of local rights, like recognizing local rights. Because in some situations, local communities might be incentivized to really support nature-based solutions, such as forest conservation, even if they are not actually given money, but they are being empowered to fully partake in the decision-making processes. So it can make a whole difference, like having the rights and also the abilities to get their concerns across, and also like the ability to say what they've got on their heart and how they would like to manage their lands. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we should probably move on to the gentleman in the black mask who's been waiting patiently for ages to ask his question.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Haywai. I come from Nigerian Conservation Foundation. What I've seen from this panelist discussion, there's already a big gap between the local community and the urban community. And in making nature-based solution realizable, that gap needs to be bridged, because there are so many concerns. Many of the panelists really spoke about the concerns of the local community, because over the years we have changed the nature to get to where we are now. Now we're trying to reverse back to the nature. That's why we're talking about nature-based solutions. So it's of great concern to me, how will the policymaker and the government, and the leaders, bridge that gap between the local community and the modern community? Because the local communities have gone wild, found their own ways in the natures, and they've stabilized the way they're living. Now we want to move over to that side and get them naturalized so that we can be on the same platform. That's my first concern. Second concern is there's no way you can have a nature-based solutions without having a kind of intrinsic values in it. You know, because those guys in the village, those guys in the rural area, they're going to lose their survivor means. And in the process of losing their survivor, what alternative is the governments and the policymakers are making? So I've designed, like in our own foundation, what we design is that, yes, we want them to maintain that nature, but we have to give them what they will feed on. And in order to design what they will feed on, we must be thinking of startup opportunities that will be available as soon as we start adopting the nature base. So that is a question across to the panelists. Thank you.
Thoughts or perspectives on that panel? Who wants to start?
Maybe I can say a few words on your first question. I think like part of the problem is, explaining the gap between research and practice, and so the gap between local communities and, decision makers and people at like higher level is because I think our main motivation as researchers in academia is to publish papers, scientific papers, and I truly think that if we need to rethink the purpose of our research if we don't go the extra mile of trying to influence policy. Our research project were specifically founded to deliver impact from many years of previous research on the social impacts of nature-based solutions. And I must say that it was very challenging, engaging with these policymakers that are very busy, they don't have time, and you also need to be strategic and be really good in negotiations, but it's been so rewarding, and I think it's the way that the funding streams are actually being established. This is where the solution needs to be, and incentivizing researchers to really engage more with policymakers, and thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not 100% sure if I am going to answer your question, but regarding the gap between the government and indigenous peoples, I can tell you that, or share with you the experience of Peru, where we took this decision that we had with the Paris Agreement regarding the platform for indigenous peoples, the one to exchange knowledge, and we made the prior consultation of the regulation of our climate law. And coming out of that process, now we have the Indigenous Platform to face climate change. And in this platform, we have the 7 national organizations, and we have the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Culture. And in that platform, which is a 4-month space where indigenous peoples talk to the government, the 7 organizations, they are giving us what is their agenda for climate change. And of course, as we all know, their vision is holistic. So they do not talk only on climate change. They speak on their means of living, the biodiversity, their way of life, and so forth. So it is established maybe 1 year ago, and now we are working on the work plan for the platform.
I think we're probably going to have to stop soon because we're coming up on 5 o'clock. So in order to conclude the discussion, we've had some amazing thoughts here, some really great ideas, lots of new thinking. What I'd like to do is ask each of the panel to give us their 1-sentence answer to what makes a good nature-based solution. I know that's unfair, but I'm going to ask it anyway, and I'm going to ask Tasfia to start.
probably nature-based solutions will be good if I won't say the what is textbook definition that we know that okay it has to be like do with human well-being and biodiversity. I'd just like to say that we need to harness the power of nature to live a healthy life and better planet. I think that makes good nature-based solutions, that we do not harm the nature, and so that nature also treats us like calmly and well. So yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. Dr. Sarah Biddy.
Yeah, I think that we don't always need to portray local communities as eco-friendly to see that they have human rights. They are the ones doing deforestation. They have customer rights, and they are deserving of compensations. And sometimes by we I mean donors, conservationists, researchers, sometimes we need to recognize that we are the bad guys. It's not always them. Thank you.
That's a very interesting home truth we've just been told, I think. Rosa.
Well, shortly, for me, a good nature-based solution would be the one that brings solutions in the long term to people.
Thank you. And Nathalie.
Yeah, biodiversity-based and community-led, and not an alternative to keeping fossil fuels in the ground.
Fabulous. That is the place to end, I think. Thank you very much, everyone. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I learned a great deal. I hope you did too. Thank you for coming.